Hello, everybody. Welcome back. It's business, and it's time to cover a ship I was really debating on covering, the Tier 10 U.S. cruiser, the Puerto Rico. Now, there is a lot of crap surrounding the ship, which is why I'm doing it now as opposed to a month ago or something like that. But I played a ton of the ship over a very short period of time, and I played it a lot during testing as well. And generally, I have come up with a pretty clear picture of what I think about the ship, and regardless of whatever you think about wargaming and their way of introducing it, I think it's important to really just kind of bask in the model, because their modeling department is honestly just incredible. The amount of work it takes to get any of these models into the game in the first place, and for us to play them, is substantial, to say the least. And this isn't just a straight copy paste of the Alaska. But on that note, if you're familiar with the Alaska, then honestly you're familiar with the ship anyways, and even if you don't have the Alaska, you probably know plenty about this. So it's a 4-turret Alaska. And so it has a 22-second reload base. That's an odd penalty, given that it also is not on the battle cruiser dispersion table like the Alaska and other ships, and it's got a high sigma of 2.2, but it's on the battleship dispersion, which really holds this ship back, and that we'll get into that pretty quickly here. I don't want to stay on the port stats too much, because again, this is a ship most people should be familiar with by now. But as far as the armor is concerned, this is actually something that is pretty interesting. You get to see the size difference here from the Alaska to the Puerto Rico here in a second, but it's, again, not just a straight copy-paste model, but there are some differences here just looking from the top down. But the side view shows that the Puerto Rico has some increased side armor. The Alaska is, I hesitate to say resilient. It definitely has some durability to it, but it also has some durability issues depending on what you're facing. The same can be said for the Puerto Rico, because there's a lot of similarities there, but basically the worst thing to encounter is a curve first that's running away from you, who's got full secondaries, because Jesus Christ, you're just going to get melted. It's so bad. But that sunken, really heavily protected citadel is a huge bonus on the Puerto Rico. But it doesn't really matter, because it's always held back by the guns, despite what you're seeing here. Wonderful, right? I'm kind of just getting all this good stuff out of the way, because unfortunately, when it comes down to it, what you're going to see is dispersion that is larger than most battleships are. From one shell, like from the leftmost to the rightmost shell, you will have shells that exceed the length of a Conqueror, or I've had shells that weren't even, they were beyond the scope of a Kurfürst, and that's pretty goddamn extreme for any ship, let alone what's supposed to be a cruiser. So there are other issues with this, such as I really feel like, for the most part, this is a ship I'm very uncomfortable with in brawling situations, and I barely got that off. I have real trouble trying to balance the front and rear turrets with this for whatever reason, and also we totally got robbed of a dev strike there for whatever reason. I mean, that was a 7 Citadel salvo against that Conqueror Thunder or whatever, and huge disappointment. But this is my case in point here. I have a Yamato dead to rights here, right? I'm rushing in here, I'm getting this done. Watch this. I'm taking my time too, right? 80,100 damage, 9 Citadels on 9 shell hits from 0.7 kilometers away. This is a 12 shell Alaska. Why the hell did that just happen? Where did those other 3 shells go in that 0.7 kilometers? And this is one that this blew me away. This was a very recent match. Actually, all these were. But I'm slowing this down because in the game I actually didn't follow these shells, so I needed to go to the free cam or whatever and watch these shells come in against the Minotaur. And Yeah. So that should have been at least half his health or a death strike. And this is the problem with the ship, is the inconsistency. You, again, like the whole reason you take a cruiser is for consistency. That's their benefit over battleships. But when you give a cruiser battleship dispersion, you defeat the purpose of it being a cruiser. So if we're talking about having the ship occupy a cruiser slot, and I'll be showing the upgrades here, of course, double rudder shift main battery mod 3, and then in the second the captain skills, which I'm not really going to talk about again because it's really down to preference. I don't like, honestly, talking about captain skills because everybody flips the fuck out about them for no reason whatsoever. I don't run concealment on full concealment on any tier 8 and up cruiser. Get over it. It is what it is. I highly recommend running Halsey though, because if you can get that Confederate bonus on them, and I'll show some of that later, it's amazing to be able to have a 13-second reload on guns like this. And obviously the same is for the Alaska, but anyways, you're really kind of just taken away from the fact that you've got a cruiser, but it's kind of trying to be more than a cruiser, where, like, you know, we don't have things like the Kronstadt so heavily affected by this. Yes, the Kronstadt has bad dispersion very frequently, but that's because it also has very high shell velocity. That's a big factor in whether or not you're going to have bad dispersion. Look at the Roma. The Roma is a perfect example of shit dispersion because of the shell velocity. These are slow shells. They have no real reason whatsoever to be this bad. And again, I'm not showing you anywhere near what I could show you for the the inconsistency of the ship. And there are certain targets and whatnot that it does very well against the Germans. I mean, I was dropping, but there was a Kurfürst on trap that I had to engage at the end of the game, and I did 19k to him with just the front turrets, and that's incredible. That's an amazing amount of damage, and I wish I got the full broadside on him with if the fronts were doing that. Like, I would have loved to have compounded it with the rear turrets, but you know, it's just, there's a lot of potential with the ship. There really is, but it never seems to actually coalesce into this whole match it's going to work, or even these next 3 salvos it's going to work the way it should. Now, at ranges like this, you're going to be against such large targets like a Kurfürst, you're definitely going to have some good results, and there's absolutely no denying that. And, you know, I guess my problem is RNG is already a bitch to deal with on battleships. I absolutely don't want to deal with that when I'm playing the cruiser. And you know, I'm going to keep making these comparisons to the Alaska because I don't think there's really any comparison of the Puerto Rico to the Stalingrad. Now, the Stalingrad is in a world unto itself for quote-unquote cruisers at tier 10. And, I mean, I just had a 245,000 damage game in it last night on the press account, and it was easy. It was as easy as it gets. I was doing multiple citadels on the Conqueror at 18.5 kilometers, no effort required whatsoever. Granted, had a good team. They were forcing the broadside and forcing them to do movements like that, which was great, because we didn't have anywhere near that success for the rest of the night with the ship. And the thing about the Puerto Rico is that you know, it's much more. It has much more of an emphasis on being an HE first type of ship, because you do have the 12 shells, and you can definitely punish a lot of ships with the HE, except that, you know, while you pen 50 millimeters and you have a 27% base chance of fire, it does not feel like that at all. I've had very little luck with sticking with HE, you know, on bow forward battleships and stuff like that, and when it has worked, it works great. I've had a couple withers with the ship, and actually, I think maybe both of those games were losses, but I can't remember. Anyhow, I have the scorecards later in the video at the end of it, but the ship is HE first, and then AP when the opportunity arises. Like in this situation, I mean, can you imagine getting 2 dev strikes on 2 different listers in the same match? Well, I guess I can't either, because of course that wouldn't happen. So there are situations where the Puerto Rico you think should do better, and it just doesn't. And it's a pretty constant feeling as far as like, man, why did that just not work the way it should have? And then you get a follow-up salvo like that, and it's like, my dudes, come on, this is... I know the ship would be entirely too powerful if it had the same type of Sigma or like even Alaska, like dispersion or whatever. But my point is, why didn't they at least test it out with like a 1.6 Sigma on the battlecruiser table instead of a 2.2 Sigma on the battleship dispersion table? Trust me, there is a massive difference. And it's, again, I don't have recorded examples. I mean, look at those shells off to the right. Where the fuck were those going? Just like, this ship creates some of the most jaw-dropping dispersion in terms of what the hell was that? It just, it's so incredibly frustrating to play. And I think that for the people that missed out on the ship, or were debating, or currently debating, or whatever it is, I don't even know if it's still available for the 15,000 gold or however much, in the dockyard. It just, I don't know, man. I'm not confident when I play the ship. I'm not confident when I go into a close quarters engagement with the ship at all. And it's whether or not the ship is meant to be played there, it doesn't really matter, because there's still situations that will arise where I need to be able to play well in those situations, in those arenas, and it just doesn't work. It's so inconsistent that I have begun to feel like if you bring the Puerto Rico into a tier 10 match, which obviously it's going to be, you are at a detriment, because there's literally every other tier 10 cruiser is a better choice to bring to a game than the Puerto Rico. And again, it's really more about the circumstances, but in an overall general sense, I think that's true. There are plenty of situations where the ship can just fucking hammer it home, and this is with Halsey active, by the way, so you're going to see a much improved reload here. And damn, this just did not happen enough, because the HE alpha is just so low with this ship. And I guess that actually goes back to something I have said multiple times on the stream, but really wanted to express here in the video. The Alaska has better dispersion, but only 9 shells. And the Puerto Rico has worse dispersion, but 12 shells. So essentially, you're still bringing an Alaska to a tier 10 guaranteed game. And you just have even less consistency with it, because, I mean, generally overall, you should have around the same amount of hits, the same effective damage, that sort of thing with the Puerto Rico and the Alaska. Again, because of the fact that you get the 12 shells, you get more potential for fires and that sort, but that's only if you actually hit, and there's no real guarantee of that. I guess part of the other thing too is that if this had slightly longer range, like maybe 19.3, 19.8 kilometer range instead of I think it's 18.8 kilometer range by default, I think this ship would actually be significantly easier to play, because you are outranged by the same tier ships significantly, even if they are cruisers, and that's pretty tough to play against. So you have slow shells, and you have short range. You can't really get into the positions that you need to in order to combat somebody who's kiting away in a Hindi or something like that, because they have to be at 17.8 kilometers for you to actually be able to get the shells to reach them, because they're going away from you at full speed and that sort. And it's complicated. Everything to do with the circumstances for given ships is complicated. There's nothing just straight up, oh yes, this always works. There's no real rule of thumb that actually is applicable. Every situation is fluid, and that's kind of the hard part, is because again, I can see the potential with the ship, and I can see where they're like, okay, this is, you know, pretty balanced. And it is, but why didn't we just test it with the battlecruiser dispersion and lower the values on it? I don't know. I don't get it. So, because it's perfectly fine for something like the Stalingrad to exist, but then we've got this thing being the way it is, and it just kind of sucks. So, but all I can think of most of the time is like, man, if I did that drive-by with my Alaska or my Henry or a Hindenburg, I would have done so much better. You know, and God help him if I was in the Minotaur. But I don't know. I think that the ship just kind of leaves a bad taste in my mouth in terms of not even anything to do with how it was brought into the game, but like, I was begging for this to have some sort of dispersion buff because it just did not seem to work the way that it should have. And if I wanted to bring a cruiser that was more effective, I would just do it. If I wanted to bring a battleship that was more effective, I would just do it. The Puerto Rico doesn't do enough of the cruiser gameplay nor the battleship gameplay to justify bringing it into a game over another ship. Just in terms of, if, hey, this is something I really want to try to, like, these next few matches, I really want to try to kick ass, don't bring this ship. That's basically the gist of it. I just don't see how this is a better ship to bring than some of the others at tier 10, because basically everything that isn't a cruiser at tier 10 is not nearly as important, because cruisers at tier 10 are astonishingly strong. So, I don't know. This just feels like, if this was actually a tier 9 ship, this would be totally different. You know, because this would be... I really think this would be better off as a tier 9 ship, and it wouldn't even... I think it would actually justify the dispersion difference and whatnot at that point from the Alaska, because it's competing directly against the Alaska, but it's doing something different from it. So I think there's actually more reason for it to be a tier 9 ship than there is for it to be a tier 10 ship as it currently stands. Huh. I didn't think about that. So anyways, yeah, so as far as the actual implementation of the ship and how people were supposed to get it and stuff, first things first, the dockyard. I think everybody pretty much agrees that is a pretty awesome feature, right? And I can't wait to see if they do it with like a destroyer or something. I would love to see like a much tighter shot, because obviously the Puerto Rico is fucking huge. But I would like to see a little bit more of the details, like close up with them doing a destroyer from the ground up. I think that would be really cool. The problem, however, is that they started with the Puerto Rico, and the way that you had to get the Puerto Rico was basically to unhealthily sit in front of your PC and grind this shit out. And I really wonder what the statistics are on that, because that's on Wargaming side of things. Like, I'm sure they have the metrics of who paid $0, or like who used up only their gold that they had and didn't actually purchase anything else, that sort of thing. I'd love to know just how many Puerto Ricos, like on any given server and in total, they have sold and that people grinded out. But we'll never get those numbers because, yeah, that's obviously just not going to happen. So that would be yeah, it's just, don't expect something like that to happen. I'm not going to talk about that anymore. But so you know, it just, I think people are going to have whatever they decide to do with the dockyard in the future. People are going to have a hard time getting on board with it, forgive the nautical pun, because of this ship and what it represents and what it represented. I think people are going to have there's going to be a backlash against whatever they do, even if it is reasonable. And the thing is, Wargaming has that coming, and they have it coming because they set this up the way they did. They're going to have to deal with so much shit in the future. even if it's a reasonable grind, even if it's something that's perfectly like, okay, this really isn't bad at all, guys. You know, we can do this within a couple weeks, but we're giving you a month to do it, type of thing. They're still going to get a ton of flack for whatever it is, and they deserve it for how poorly they handled this. And not just the event itself, but the repercussions of it, the way that they interacted with the community. And all we can hope for is that they learned from it. I guess things seem a little better. Look at this terrible dispersion. Oh my god. I mean, case in point. Jesus Christ. So it just, you know, we have to constantly evaluate our relationship with wargaming as well. And I think it's important to say that, because you should not feel obligated to grind out something for 3 weeks or whatever, especially at the expense of your health or your finances or something like that. You don't need to do it, and especially for something that just really ultimately isn't worth it anyways. I mean, you know, when you move on from the game a week or a year, 3 years from now, it's not really going to matter. So, you know, if you want to support them, support them. If you want to whale it, you whale it. It is what it is. It's your money. You do what you want to do with it, but you should not feel obligated to continue paying for it or to stick with the game just because you've paid for it. You know, it just, there's more to it than that. There's more to gaming and life than that. You know, it's just not that big a deal. But that was my highest damage game at 227. It was a server reset, so of course magically my scorecard doesn't exist anymore. But I wanted to say that, you know, I know I've been saying the buzzword a lot. There's potential with the ship, and basically the more you fire, the more you are kind of making up for the terrible dispersion the ship has. So you hit 100 hits in a match, you're probably doing all right. You hit 150, 200, you're probably kicking some serious ass. And that's the thing, is you have to make up for the dispersion in certain ways. And whether that's, you know, more close quarters combat, you know, ambushing people, or just trying to get those hit numbers up, then that's what you got to do. But ultimately, if you have the Alaska, this ship is not worth it. Just don't. Like, I know it's late to the game, or I'm late to the game on the reviews here and whatnot, but really it's just another ship, and it plays all right, but not well enough to be a tier 10 cruiser, and sure as shit not enough for the amount of trouble that people have had to go through to get this, and the amount of flack that was created from this whole debacle. So all we can hope for is that Wargaming learn from this, and that we as well learn from it too, because nobody should have to put up with bullshit like this again. But thank you for watching today, guys. I will see you back here next time. Take care.